Have you ever felt overwhelmed trying to study for an exam only to realize that despite all your efforts, nothing seems to stick? Or maybe you spend hours staring at a math problem, a physics concept, or even a language rule, wondering if there's an easier way to understand it. Basically, dealing with every single subject. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Learning can be tough, whether it's tackling complex subjects like physics, math, or programming, or even trying to master a new language or understand economics. But what if there was a simpler way to truly get it all? One method that could work for pretty much every subject out there. Well, today, you and I are diving into one of the most fascinating questions for any lifelong learner. What's the best way to learn? Now, we all know that learning is essential, whether it's for school, work, or just personal growth. But have you ever thought how you learn the best? Today, I want to share one of the most effective ways to lock in what you're learning. And it's a method that might surprise you because it's not about endless repetition or cramming all night. It's about explaining the subject itself. But not just to anyone. You can explain it to your pet, your friend, your AI friend, even to yourself. Or maybe your favorite plushie. Let me explain how and why this works. The idea here is simple. When you explain something, you're actually kind of teaching it. And teaching forces you to understand the material on a deeper level. You see, when you just read or listen passively, it's easy to think that you understand. But when you actually have to explain it, you quickly realize where the gaps in your understanding are. Now let's talk about why this method is so powerful. First of all, explaining something requires you to break it down. You have to chunk it. You can't use complicated terms if you're trying to teach a concept to someone or something who has no idea what you're talking about. Whether that's your friend, your pet cat, or even your reflection on the mirror. This forces you to simplify the concept into its most essential parts, and guess what? That's when real learning happens. You start connecting the dots, identifying the main ideas, and suddenly everything starts to click in your brain. Another reason this works so well is that explaining engages different parts of your brain. It's not just about memorization anymore. It's about processing, organizing, and even verbaling what you know. This shift from passive to active learning gives your brain the chance to solidify the info in a way that lasts. There's actually research to back this up. Studies show that students who explain concepts, even just to themselves, tend to retain info better than to those who only read or listen to it. So next time you're stuck on a tough concept, try walking through it out loud. Imagine you're teaching it to a classmate, even if your audience is just a couple of stuffed teddy bears. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. What if I don't have anyone to explain it to? Like, weren't you listening to me? The great thing is, you don't need anyone else there. It is as simple as talking to yourself. I do it all the like okay, maybe not all the time, but I definitely do it when I'm trying to figure something out. By speaking the problem out loud, I start to notice things that I hadn't before. It's almost like I'm having a conversation with my own brain, and for real, it really works. Now let's dive into the reasons why and how this technique works. The Feynman technique was because it leverages principles from cognitive psychology and neuroscience related to how we learn, process, and retain information. It works because it activates multiple cognitive processes we call elaboration and deep processing, error correction, simplification, and active engagement, which have all been shown to enhance memory retention and understanding. Richard Feynman himself said, "If you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it well enough. So, if you can break a complex concept down to its simplest form, then you truly grasp it." When you try to explain a concept in simple terms, you engage in active recall, one of the most powerful learning techniques. This forces your brain to retrieve information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. Research has shown that actively retrieving information strengthens the neural connections associated with that knowledge, enhancing long term retention. By explaining a concept in your own words, you deepen your understanding. This taps into elaborative rehearsal, a process where you can connect new information with the prior knowledge, thereby creating stronger associations in your brain. Explaining a topic also prompts you to process the material more deeply, which is key to long term understanding. When you teach or explain something, gaps in your understanding become apparent. These gaps are opportunities for correction and reinforcement. Neuroscientific studies show that making mistakes and correcting them is an essential part of learning because it triggers activity in the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, is related to error detection, and strengthens learning circuits. The Feynman technique encourages you to simplify complex ideas, which relates to the brain's natural preference for chunking information, grouping information into manageable units, and simplifying the material forces you to break it down into these smaller chunks, making it easier for the brain to process and store it. Teaching forces you to engage actively with material, which enhances neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. The more active you are in your learning, as opposed to passively reading or listening, the more robust and durable your learning will be. Oh, and there's one more thing. You may struggle with the technique. If you are having a hard time simplifying, start by writing down the steps in bullet points. Then try explaining it in 3 sentences or less. That may work for you. The Feynman technique can be effective with a wide range of subjects. However, it is particularly beneficial for subjects that are complex and conceptually challenging, as breaking down these topics reveals gaps in understanding. In my opinion, subjects in which this technique works exceptionally well are firstly, physics and maths. Given that Richard Feynman himself was a physicist, this method works well for abstract and technical subjects where foundational understanding is critical. Secondly, programming and computer science. Simplifying algorithms, data structures, or coding principles to basic terms can enhance problem solving and conceptual grasp. Thirdly, philosophy and logic. This may seem different from the other two I talked about, but it works here too. Since explaining philosophical theories and logical arguments in simple terms forces us to pinpoint and clarify intricate ideas. Fourthly, science subjects like chemistry, biology, etc. Breaking down processes like cellular mechanisms, chemical reactions, things like that makes the material more approachable. Fifthly, language subjects. Teaching grammar rules or vocabulary in a simple language helps reinforce your understanding. This one is kind of basic. Lastly, sixth, economics and finance. Concepts such as market dynamics, inflation, and investment strategies often benefit from simplification to become clearer. Except all those school subjects, you can use Feynman to learn anything, like a historical event, or a literary theme, or even to memorize things. So, if you're looking for one of the best ways to learn, try explaining what you're learning out loud. You'll find that teaching the material forces you to understand it in a way that you never would otherwise. Plus, you might get surprised how much sense things start to make when you just hear yourself say them. Don't forget that learning doesn't have to be that complicated. It just needs a little creativity.
You asked me if an ordinary person, by studying hard, would get to be able to imagine these things like I imagine. Of course, I was an ordinary person who studied hard. There's no miracle people. It just happens they got interested in this thing and they learned all this stuff. They're just people. There's no talent, a special miracle ability to understand quantum mechanics or a miracle ability to imagine electromagnetic fields that comes without practice and reading and learning and study. So if you say you take an ordinary person who's willing to devote a great deal of time and study and work and thinking and mathematics and time, then he's become a scientist.